Recording on cloud.
Should I
Okay.
reintroduce for the recording?
No, I think we'll probably be okay.
I think I can share. Can I share screen even if I'm not the host?
I think you can too, but we were just trying to be careful to make sure you could. But
Yeah,
does it show share screen?
Yep, it does.
Oh, then we're good.
Okay,
this way,
yay!
then.
Good.
Anyway, welcome, Ben. And Ben, would you take it away?
Sure. Well, I'll just say, I'm curious. Can I just have people quickly say who they are and what they're up to real quick, just so I get a sense of who's in the room?
Hey, can I start?
Yeah. Who's there? Go in alphabetical order.
Hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Isaac. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just start because I have to just listen for the rest of the time. I'm Isaac. I'm on the NCD committee, sometimes hosting this meeting, but we're glad you're with us. I'm in between calls right now, and I'm excited to. I'm always asking churches, hey, what are you doing to like do something risk-taking in the future and being faithful to God's call? So I'm excited to hear about Farm Church, and I'm excited for our time together.
Thanks.
Now you won't probably hear me the rest of the time. So
okay.
Bye.
Goodbye.
All right, who's next?
Who else?
You can just jump in.
Okay. How about Chris?
I have to unmute myself.
Or Ann? Okay.
Okay. I'm Ann. Wow. I've been on NCD 5 years and I had to go off because of term limitations. So now I am seconded onto them. I'm eligible to be a CRE. I'm a seminarian, and I'm trying to think of new ways to do things.
Cool. Thanks, Ann.
How about I'll just keep inviting people?
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Chris, why don't you introduce?
My name is Chris Thomas. I am the chair of the current chair of the New Church Development Committee. I'm still getting feedback somewhere here. Okay, Jace, I think that's your mic that's feeding back in, because when I mute you, it goes away. I've been the chair off and on for the last 7 or 8 years. I am currently the head pastor at First Presbyterian Church of Dearborn. I have a history of church planting. I've worked in a couple church plants, and I went to seminary thinking God was calling me to plant a church, and God just kind of led different directions. So I've been a big supporter of trying to help church planting initiatives in the denomination and in our presbytery ever since. Cool. And so we've been on a long journey of just discerning how we can do things differently and how we can support a culture that raises up leaders with creative ideas within our presbytery, so that we have people who potentially might start churches in the future. Yeah. So we're not even particularly looking to start churches. We're just looking to encourage people who are starting new things. And so, so like Renee said, so that's a little bit who I am and why I'm here.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Sadie, how about you?
Thank you. I am a member of Grosse Pointe Memorial Church. I'm currently attending seminary, pursuing an MDiv, which I've been doing for a while, very part-time. And I do primarily coaching as a profession, but I started a young professional group called the Lit Meetup, where we are a group of young professionals and entrepreneurs, and we gather monthly and we talk about best practices in business and life and how God uses our work and the different things we do in the business world as a vehicle and a vessel to do his work. So it's a growing group of 20s and 30s, and we, like I said, we meet monthly. I've had it going for about a year and almost 2 years, and it continues to grow as different people hear about it and as I reach out to different folks.
Cool. Thanks.
Sadie. Yeah, Kara, I invite you.
I'm the pastor over at Lincoln Park Presbyterian Church, and I am all about innovation. So I find myself right now consuming information from all kinds of sources, because I'm always looking for new ways of whether it's leading the church, whether it's worship, just how we work. all kinds of things like that. So that is a main interest for me.
Awesome. Good to meet you.
Cool. Paul, I invite you.
Hi, I'm Paul Stunkel. I'm the pastor at St. Paul's Presbyterian in Livonia. I did New Church in Illinois for 13 years. And I was invited into this group to be a potential coach.
Great. Paul, where in Illinois were you?
Crystal Lake,
Oh, yeah.
Algonquin, Lake in the
So
Hill.
I grew up in Oswego,
Ah,
the other
okay.
side of the suburban Mass from you. But,
Yes.
yeah.
Yep.
Good.
Oops, sorry, Wanda, please.
I'm Wanda Moon, and I'm an elder at First Presbyterian Northville. I am and always have been sort of restless. I'm a new member of the NCD, and this group gives me energy that I don't get in other places always. And so I'm looking forward to working with them and to encouraging whatever innovation comes along.
Great.
Thank you. Bethany, glad to have you here. How about you introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, I'm Bethany. I'm in my first call as a associate pastor for Youth and Mission in Birmingham, which is a suburb of Detroit. We have a good sized congregation, very generous congregation, so excited to be a pastor of mission for them and to come up with new things for them to do. Yeah, just excited to reshape the church for whatever's coming next.
Yeah, good.
Great. And Jace, would you introduce yourself?
Hold on, I think I did it. There you go. Yeah, I'm Jace Arledge. I am a youth director at First Presbyterian Church in Howell, and I am also the coordinator, or whatever you want to call it, for the Presbytery of Detroit for youth. And I also have a Matthew 25 group called Save Your Life Community Outreach here in Fowlerville, where I live, that right now we're in the middle of helping feed the thousands of people in my community that are suffering at this moment. We've done in the past probably 3 weeks, we've fed over 7,500 families, us and 2 other groups that are working with us. And we're continuing and still trying to get donations. So that's what I'm doing.
Great. Good to meet you.
Great. Stephanie, would you introduce yourself?
I am Stephanie Lewis, and I am a member of Hope Presbyterian Church in Detroit, Michigan. We're a small elderly church, and we're working to establish a stronger relationship in the community. Right now, we have established a relationship with a close by Presbyterian Village Senior Citizens Complex. Everybody's on lockdown, so it's been a challenge to keep the relationship going, along with the issues that the particular village has with keeping their administration consistent. But I'm here to get ideas and to listen to the things that other people are doing, and hopefully we can take those ideas back to help us in our work.
Thank you.
Great.
And Dave, welcome. Would you introduce yourself?
Good morning. I'm Dave Bunch. I'm elder at Geneva Presbyterian in Canton, a suburb about midway between Detroit and Ann Arbor, a little bit closer to Ann Arbor, and also vice moderator of Presbytery.
Okay.
And I'm sorry I'm a little bit late. I just bailed on a book study group that we're doing, talking about, we just started reading So You Want to Talk About Race by Ayoma Oluwa. And so we're about 5 or 6 chapters into that book, and it's it's the perspective of a Black woman who is helping us whites look at racism from her perspective, having just finished discussing Waking Up White by Deb Irving, who is a white woman talking about her journey into better understanding white privilege, especially.
I should also say some of our folks in our presbytery are doing a different webinar today too that's looking at the inequities that are happening right now with COVID, and so and across racial lines in particular. So just encourage us after this, at some point to look at that recording too. These are going on at the same time. Adam, would you introduce yourself?
Hello. I was trying to not minimize distraction as I'm figuring out lunch. Are we doing just like a little introduction-y
I was just
thing?
saying, who are you and what are you doing these days in Detroit Presbytery?
Do you want the short version or the long version?
The short version is good. And
okay.
Yeah.
So I work with the Southwest Detroit Immigrant and Refugee Center. We do free and low-cost legal services for vulnerable people in the area and a lot of immigrants and refugees, as you might imagine from the name. I'm involved in various churchy things as well.
Cool. It's great to meet you. Thanks.
Yes, and we have someone on the phone. Who is that? You're muted too, so I don't know if Chris needs to unmute. Who do we have on the phone with us?
It's Ruth Azar.
Hi, Ruth Azar.
Hello. I'm walking around, so that's why I'm not on my computer.
That's okay.
So I'll apologize for that. So I am a CRE pastor at the Second Mile Center of Detroit. It's a mission center in the city of Detroit, and we are definitely on the front lines right now. Just instead of having people come into our building, we're going to their homes and making deliveries and calling and doing crafts for the kids and trying to occupy them so there's less domestic violence in the household, we pray, and texting and calling and just really trying to meet the needs of a community, even meeting people in their cars that are find themselves homeless right now, which there are still at this point. So that's what we're doing. So we've had to recreate ourselves a tad bit, and with two of us, and so we're just trying to do our part, hopefully.
Okay, thank you.
Ruth, I'll keep you unmuted because I think on the phone there, you don't have as many options on the computer to unmute yourself and stuff. But for everybody else, I'm going to keep everybody muted. And if you want to use the chat as a way to ask a question or to interact with each other, then feel free. Or if you just want to raise your hand in the video, Renee and I will try and do our best job possible to recognize you and then call on you. And if you, Ruth, if you want to chime in some way or another, just speak up and we'll let you ask a question. So.
Thank you, Chris. I'll mute myself on and off. Thank you.
Great, thanks. All right, so Ben, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks everybody for checking in. It just kind of gives, it's one of the things with these.
I'm sorry, before you
go
start,
ahead.
The session that's going on now, the Zoom meeting that's going on now, where can we find that?
I know that Lindsay Anderson put it in the Presbytery of Detroit clergy group on Facebook. But if some of us are not on Facebook or are not in that group, I could maybe email that out afterwards. I'm hoping that it's going to be recorded. I don't think it's being done by the Presbytery, but it was definitely people in the Presbytery were invited to it. So Lindsay certainly will know that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, she just posted that a couple days ago, and I thought, oh, I'm so bummed these are the same time. But yeah, so sounds good. Cool.
Yeah. So, well, thanks for checking in. It's with Zoom, it's we miss eye contact and being able to kind of just be in the same space and create a spirit, which I think groups do when they come together, as there's sort of we create a chemistry and a spirit. And that's difficult to do on Zoom, but just even knowing who's there for me is helpful. So thank you. I'll just say real quick, Renee's right. We've known each other for a long time, and I envy all of you that she's in your midst and kind of doing her thing and shaking things up and bringing a lot of, I'm sure, energy and innovation to the work you all are doing. So really grateful for her invitation to come and be with you all today. So it's interesting, something that a few of you described your work as sort of working on front lines and thinking about folks who are living in cars and who are home insecure, or with the variations of immigrant status and refugee status. And I was participating in a podcast recently, and one of the questions that we were rolling around with was this idea of, people keep saying about this atmosphere that we're in right now, that everything has changed. And it's good, I think, for the church to keep in mind that some things have not changed. Home, for example, still is not a safe place for lots of people, that we don't all have a place that we can comfortably stock up on groceries and retreat and just sort of weather this thing out. And it's interesting to be talking about risk or faithful risk taking in a climate where everything feels risky, where it just feels risky to leave our houses or to pick up a package on the front porch. And I'm sympathetic to churches, especially now, but at other times in our history where there's been a desire, almost a default, to say, can church be the one place where we're not taking risks? And certainly for folks who deal with risk every time they leave their homes, for folks who are facing discrimination and prejudice and racism, I get the temptation to sort of say, can church be a place where we're insulated from risk in our wider culture? And I honor that. And yet I also, one of the things I'll be saying today, and we can discuss, is just the extent to which risk is baked into our faith story. If you decided to read the Bible with sort of a risk alert set of lenses on, it's not hard. You don't get very far till you start seeing both the nature of God's character and also of God's people, that we are a risk-taking people. And so it's kind of interesting to have this discussion now when just we're weighing risk all the time in our culture. I want to echo what Chris said. I think if you have questions, go ahead and type them in the chat, and either Chris or Renee can kind of curate those, and we can come back to those. And I would say, Chris or Renee, if there's a moment where you just feel like, what, let's just feel free to interrupt me, and we can hit something again, or we can elaborate a little bit. So, okay, good. I'm going to share a little bit about my own story, and then kind of ease into some of what we've learned through the farm church experience about risk, and kind of go from there. So I'm going to start with I apologize to Ruth for this part, in that, wait a minute, where is it? That this is going to, I've got a lot of pictures that I want to show, and so you're going to miss those. You know what, Chris? It's not letting me share my screen now.
Okay, let me make you host.
Okay.
And then also with the PowerPoint, Ben, if you want to hand me that as a PDF or something like that afterwards, I can make that available to everybody, and then I'll also make this video available via YouTube. So if anybody misses the visuals,
okay,
they
good.
can get it there. Here you go. Does that work?
I've got it now. Yeah.
Okay.
Good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Farm Church and just kind of our origin story. I'll say quick, Farm Church is a church that meets on a farm and leverages the resources of that farm to address food insecurity. That is our quick, down and dirty elevator speech. We're a church that meets on a farm and leverages the resources of that farm to address food insecurity. We've been worshiping we're coming up on our 4-year anniversary, but some of the origin of Farm Church was back in the summer of 2014. I had a dream in the middle of the night that I was called to serve a new church. And in the dream, I went sight unseen, just like it was my first day. And somebody from the search committee was taking me to the church, which I was seeing for the first time. And there was no building. It was a farm. And then I woke up. And in light of everything that's happened since, it was an embarrassingly short dream. But I woke up, this was July 16th, 2014. I woke up, it was 3:17 in the morning. And my first thought was, how fun and amazing would that be to worship God on a farm, or in a, like have worship in a barn or in a orchard or a pond, next to a pond. And then after church, your kids could, for Sunday school, they could take care of chickens and they could harvest eggs. And then like families could take those eggs to another family in need that day, or they could take them to a food pantry. And I just started thinking about farm to food pantry, farm to elementary school cafeteria, like all the ways that a farm leveraging food resources, a church on a farm leveraging its food resources could be an interesting and engaging partner. So I went to Google and Googled Farm Church because I was like, somebody's got to be doing this somewhere. I was aware of 1001. And so I thought somebody has got to be doing this somewhere. But I couldn't find anything. So then I went to GoDaddy and thought, I'll just see if the domain name's available, because if it's taken, then I know at least somebody's thinking about it. I typed in farmchurch.org and it was available. So at this point, I had been awake for about 20 to 25 minutes. Like I was still in that place where all my ideas sound good, kind of half awake, half asleep. The sermon illustration that comes in the middle of the night that you just think, that is a Pulitzer Prize winner, like, too bad I only get to use it once, and then you wake up the next morning and you go, that is a horrible, it's terrible. Not only will I not use it this Sunday, I'll never use it. I sort of was aware that I was in that place, but I got out my credit card and I bought it. I called a friend and I talked to my wife the next morning. I called a friend who was a farmer before seminary, and another friend who'd done a lot of farming, who was also a Presbyterian pastor. And I was like, guys, we could do this. And they all said yes. I'm glossing over giant, kind of narratives here, but there was for 3 families who each had a pastor in them, we all thought it was a good idea. We started doing a nationwide search for a place where we could put Farm Church. This is over a period of 7 or 8 months. We put thousands of miles on our cars. We quit our jobs as Presbyterian pastors of the churches we were serving so that we could go public with a search. We had serious conversations in all of these places, at least in 12 states. We were looking for an urban population that had a high concentration of both people, but also food insecurity issues. There's food insecurity everywhere. There are lots of rural food deserts in our country where people are surrounded by crops, of course, but they're not edible crops until they're processed. So we looked at all these different places, had conversation with anyone who would talk to us. Long story short, we picked Durham, North Carolina, for those reasons. There was a high concentration of urban poverty, both in Durham and in Raleigh, but also proximity to open land, and also a foodie culture, a population of folks in the city of Durham who we've always said that there's lots of people for whom this conversation about connecting with God and connecting with neighbor and connecting with land and this as the source of life and food, that those all feel innately like one conversation. And so there was a culture of Durham that we certainly felt when we visited the farmers market, which we did in a number of cities, that really drew us here, and felt called to plant Farm Church here. So this is us after having decided it would be Durham. We're standing in front of the Bulls Stadium. We're smiling, but we're scared out of our minds. Neither one, this is my friend Alan Breimer, who he and I were the primary pastors who started Farm Church. And neither one of us went to seminary thinking about church planting or considered church planting for the majority of our career. It was only this dream sort of kickstarted an idea, and we said yes. And for a long time, we would have been happy to be talked out of it, but here we were. We moved to Durham a little bit over a year after I had the dream, and got our kids in school, and then just looked at each other and said, well, we didn't know anybody in town. We've repressed a lot of this, actually, as I think about it. But it was also an exciting and an exhilarating time of just showing up and with meetup kind of gatherings, and even meeting people randomly in line to pick up the kids from school, or in coffee shops and bars, and just talking to people about the idea. This is probably relatable to a lot of you. When I was the new pastor in Racine, Wisconsin, and people, when you're talking to somebody, you're meeting somebody, and they say, well, what brings you to this town? And what brings you to town? And I would say, well, I'm the new pastor at First Presbyterian Church. I don't know about you, but for me, that's generally a conversation ender. Like, it's sort of like saying, I have a rash that I haven't quite identified yet. I mean, people it's happened to me that people sort of slink away. It's sort of like, well, that's very nice. So what we found here, and it's for those of us who are thinking about new church development, innovation, new projects of the church, the reason an elevator speech is so important isn't so that you can put a tagline on your website, or that it can go in the bulletin. It's something that when you say it, you answer the question, who are we and why are we here, in a very succinct way. So we would talk to people here, what brings you to town? I said, well, we're starting a new church. It's called Farm Church. The idea is to be a church that meets on a farm and leverages the resources of that farm to address food insecurity. And that was like lightning in a bottle for us, with people some atheist agnostic folks who said, you gotta meet my roommate, like this, that. Or even people who said, I'm done with church, but here's my email, like that kind of thing. And so this group of people here, some of them are members of our families, but also just folks we met randomly, and who started to be a core team with us. And for months, we had just this group of people that we would meet. Sometimes on Sunday morning, we just all go play kickball, but we'd also meet in our homes, share communion, and start living into this reality even before we put a seed in the ground. As Farm Church got closer, we started on May 1st, 2016. We did a countdown online, and it's sort of like having a party where you're not sure if anyone is going to come. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling. It's just like, what are we doing? We've moved across the country for this. And then actually, as that Sunday grew near, it forecast rain, and our whole premise is built on at least half of our time together being outside. We'll talk about where we meet in a bit, but and then like the day before, it's just pouring, and so we were like, rain or shine, Farm Church. And then it poured on our first day. We had greeters out there just getting soaked. But this is where we meet. Farm Church meets on a 2.5-acre urban farm just east of downtown Durham. It's a nonprofit farm that is an after-school program for children and youth. And so they do a lot of they basically use gardening and harvesting food and sharing food as a medium for teaching life skills. And no one's using it on Sunday. And they have given us the space to meet and gather folks together. And so we just do a lot of, at the beginning, we just did a lot of projects for them, but this is some of what the grounds look like, just sort of a gorgeous, kind of eclectic, 2.5 acre urban garden. They have a building where we get in out of the rain almost every Sunday, you know, if it's raining or hot, but sometimes we'll spend the entire time outside. This is the indoor space, which is, it's so ideal in that these giant windows just overlook the gardens, often where we have just been working. Part of our premise at Farm Church is that worship begins when people get out of their cars and they walk on the land and begin to connect with land as source of food. And we circle up at the beginning of Farm Church, and this is my wife here with the bricks and the biceps. We circle up and we talk about the theme for the day, and often give people a scripture or something to think about as they go out. And then the first hour of worship is farming. And Renee can tell you, she's been there. Sometimes we come in and we are filthy. You know, it's 90 degrees at 10 o'clock in the morning, maybe already, and the soil is a little damp, and we just get at it. And so we wear grubbies to church. But then the second hour, we're inside, and on a typical Sunday. And much of our order of worship does follow a liturgy that would be familiar to a lot of us, although one of our thoughts has been, I'm sure Renee has used this phrase, the folks who are coming to Farm Church by and large are spiritually hungry but institutionally suspicious. And so it's interesting to think about planning a worship service where you de-institutionalize the language, but continue to move with the Holy Spirit in what we do and say. And that is there's sort of, sometimes that seems easy and sometimes it feels like a fine line that we just stumble over. But this was our first day. We had people decorate prayer flags, and we kind of hoisted them over our heads. And we do that on the anniversary. We won't do it this year. Maybe we will. I know it's be interesting to figure out how to do this via Zoom, but it was great. Like 65 to 70 people came on our first Sunday, which was a great showing of support from other Presbyterian churches and friends, college students, the campus ministries at Duke and North Carolina and North Carolina State over in Raleigh. You know, and then the second Sunday we had like 19 people, and there were times when maybe 10 or 12, and that included our two families, of which was 9. So this isn't what they all looked like. We've done things, and we'll talk about risk later, and thinking in terms of micro risks. One of the micro risks that we've taken as a church is, for 1 week, we changed our name to PICKLE Church. We changed it on our website, on our Facebook and bulletin, everything. It was PICKLE Church. And that Sunday, we brought in a chef who's a good friend, and we did part of the sermon was a knife skills seminar, and he taught people how to properly hold and use a chef's knife and chop veggies, and taught people how to pickle. And we put together 100 or so jars of pickles, although people brought their own vegetables too, and we pickled so much that day. But the idea was, you know, if you can see the character of God in a cucumber, the DNA of God's existence in an okra, can you not see it in your neighbor? The next year we did butter church. We made butter you can make butter in a jar by shaking cream, but we also made sweet potato butter, butternut squash butter, apple butter. And that time, by then we had a more robust relationship with food pantries, and we took 100 or so jars of butter to a food pantry that we have a partnership with, and folks were able to take that home. We also work on a vacant lot just north and east of Duke's East Campus. This is what it looked like when we started. There are power lines overhead, and so it can't be developed. And the people who own it, we shared our story with them, and they said, you know, we've got this vacant lot. We've always thought about a community garden, and they gave it to us. to use. Now, I mean, we don't own it, but they've just said you can do whatever you want here. So we got to work on that. That's Alan, and actually the ground was so hard we broke that tiller in the background. It's just North Carolina clay. I mean, oh gosh, to be in Michigan or Illinois or Wisconsin and the black earth. I was in Iowa recently, and just looking at the soil just made me envious. It's a lot of red clay here, and it gets baked hard. So we actually hired somebody with a tractor just to come and start breaking through. And we've done so much work on this soil. But this is how we started there. We had 24 4-foot by 25-foot beds. So 2,400 square feet of tillage. And so Wednesday nights, this is, we gather there and we garden together and work that land. What's interesting about that is that there are folks who have gardened with us on Wednesday nights who have never come on Sunday morning. We've intentionally from the beginning said we're not doing membership in the traditional sense. We're not going to have members and non-members, visitors. It's what does it mean to belong to a church? We'll talk about this a little bit later too, but what does it mean to follow Jesus and to have a church be a community that helps you follow Jesus? For a lot of folks who are younger than me, membership is an enormous stumbling block. And could it be that someone who gardens with us on Wednesday night and participates in our way of following Jesus Christ, that they are a part of Farm Church, and we affirm that. Kale, there's a picture of Kale. This is one of my daughters and another. You know, if you stick out your butt, one kid will spray it. That's in our minutes, actually, that Sunday. This is my other daughter with some straw. Youth groups come. We get a lot of help from other Presbyterian churches. We don't do all of it alone. And so groups come, folks in the community come and help us garden there. And we grow just about everything you can think of. This picture is of a group from the University of Georgia who sends up a group of college students every spring break, and they spend a whole day with us, and they come just ready to work. This is back at Seeds, which is the name of the organization where we meet on Sundays. And as we've built our relationship with them, they've given us more space to garden. And so this is a typical Sunday harvest. Worship is over. Prior to this, the communion table was right on top of over these food items. And then we spend time kind of packaging them and getting them ready. They go to the food pantry that day that we've been in worship together. We have a prayer wall that we invite people, and this is part of our regular liturgy, that we invite people to write prayers on ribbons and tie them to that wall. And it's sort of a mainstay. And one of the things we've thought about is that the word liturgy literally means the work of the people. And so for us, we say again and again, we have an agrarian liturgy, that the work of the people is literally work, the work that we do. But even to ask the question, during the context of a worship service, how do we innovate moments and experiences that are liturgical in that they invite people to move their body, to be creative, to express themselves. And so this is one of those things. We sometimes take this to the farmer's market, and it's fun to just put up a sign that says, this is a prayer wall. Do you have something that you're hopeful for or praying about, or something you want to say to God? Write it on a ribbon and tie it down. We were at this farmer's market the day after the 2016 election, and there was a line of people waiting to tie a ribbon on. One of the things I think about, it's tricky right now, of course, but when we think about innovation and risk, one of the concepts that we've cultivated is the concept of churches playing more away games. If you think about it, your church gets 52 home games a year where people, visitors, come to you on your home turf where you're comfortable with the furniture, the flow of time, the things that are said, the expectations and norms. It's good for churches to play away games, to go somewhere else where maybe we don't even bring anything with us, but we just experience the holy in someone else's place. And for us, this is, we bring our prayer wall to music festivals as well, and we'll just set it up, and we're this kind of random church in the midst of everything else, but and not necessarily to talk to people. Some people will just write down a prayer and be on their way, and that's fine. But this is one of our kiddos. There's two more of our little guys, Benjamin and Gabriel. They're planting garlic actually right now, which is something you do in the fall because garlic's a bulb. And so he's jamming that trowel into the, look at that clay. Isn't that nice? Garlic will still grow in that. But the following spring, all right, this was probably about April, May, the garlic was up, and it's kind of wild to look at that and see our logo. And so we've had a lot of these moments where are just stunning to sort of have an idea and to just speak that reality into being and then see it come true. And there are days when both Alan and I still sort of pinch ourselves. Obviously, this has been a ton of work, and but it's been fun and exhilarating. This concept of risk. I mean, I hesitate to lead with all that. It's like, so there you go. Just, have a wild dream and then quit your job and leave the Presbyterian Board of Pensions or whatever, like that. As I said, it's especially now, it's sort of insensitive to say, go take a risk, and yet this idea of it being in our DNA. I mean, it is through and through. And so for this section of the presentation, I'm going to acknowledge up front that this is bad PowerPoint etiquette, but I'm just going to, if you need this, you can look at the video later, but just to sort of, it's bad etiquette because I'm just putting a bunch of words up, but I just want to blow through this and say, Moses, prophets, John the Baptist, Jesus, all of the things that Jesus did, the people Jesus touched and welcomed, even Jesus's death in that context, and if we think about the Christian story and moment after moment when folks spoke out in faith and took risks, sometimes ill-advised for the sake of the gospel, that is how God has made God's self known in our world. And that's what I mean when I say it's baked in. It's the DNA of our faith, this idea of risk. And I sort of want to put it out there that our stories and our church's stories shouldn't be any different. And I think that the scripture I like to use a lot is that Jesus told that story about the landowner who did very well for himself, and he said to it, and he put his he said, I'll build bigger barns, and I'll put my grain in bigger barns, and then I'll say to my soul, you've done so well for yourself. Now relax, eat, drink, and be merry. And that's a caricature, but I see that in a lot of our churches, this idea that we look at a climate of decline in our wider culture, and we say, let's insulate ourselves from that. Let's protect what we have. And I get that. I'm just pointing out it's not really the gospel story. Sorry. Oh, thanks be to God. It's not our story. I'm mindful of this, and I think for us, who are going back to our churches and say, hey, we should take more risks. I just want to, this is another thing I'm just going to blow through real quick, and I'm going to highlight something. These are just, if you go on the internet and get a definition of risk, this is what you're going to find. Exposure to danger, the possibility that something unpleasant or unwelcome will happen, threat, possibility of harm, to expose to danger, to take a chance, imperil, jeopardize, put in jeopardy, hazard, gamble, bet, wager, chance, venture, incur the chance of unfortunate consequences. So I just want you to look at that. when we use the word risk, I did not change any of this, and I didn't leave anything out. When we talk about risk, the word, these are our definitions of risk. And so when we can get courageous and say, yes, it's baked in, it's who we are as a people, it's Jesus took lots of risks, so did Moses. Yes, and here's what a lot of us and folks who are part of our communities associate with the word risk. And it's worth, I just want to stop and honor that for a moment, that risk is not comfortable, to say the least. So I typically like to think about risk in terms of faithful risk. We're not talking about risky behavior, right? So, well, maybe, and sometimes we are, but really we're thinking about what does it mean to be faithful risk takers, to be faithful in our risk taking, and to calculate risks that are faithful. I don't know if you know this poem. It's one that it just always occurs to me when I say that. And so I finally just put it in the presentation, but it's by Hafiz, who was a Persian poet of, I think, the 14th or 16th century. It's called The God Who Only Knows Four Words. Every child has known God, not the God of names, not the God of don'ts, not the God who ever does anything weird, but the God who only knows four words and keeps repeating them, saying, come dance with me, come dance. And I love that poem because it speaks to the baked in quality of just the DNA of the sacred source of the universe, to whom, we have come in relationship with, through Jesus Christ, that there's this constant invitation. Here's our quick outline for the rest of our time together. It's 3 images: an escalator, an egg, a broken egg that says love on it, and cows. So we're just going to use that for the rest of our time, and then are we, Renee and Chris, are we at a good time to keep moving, or any
Sure. Unless anybody, we could take a question or two though.
Sure.
Let's do that. Let's maybe take 2 questions now, and then we'll do more at the end.
Yeah.
Unless no one has any, then we'll just power through.
Yeah.
So speak up in the chat if you, or just say me.
Stephanie.
Okay.
You gotta unmute yourself.
I appreciate, this is exciting. Mm-hmm. and I understand the risk. Help put the risk in dimension for me in terms of, you left a position in a church, and then you went looking for this, and you spent a lot of time trying to find it and establish it and everything. So, how did you live? How did you survive? Where was your funding to live coming from during this time?
Yeah. This is what is this kind of the scariest part for a lot of people. So at the time, things have changed in part because of us, but others too. At the time, farm church didn't exist. To receive Presbyterian healthcare and board of pensions, all that stuff, death, disability, you have to be in a called and installed position, which farm church certainly was not. We didn't even know where we were going to put it, but we had to go public and leave our positions so that we could discern a place. So we left board of pensions, and that was the first big risk, which there's something about risk that's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, to say, we know that this is what we are called to do. That's an exhilarating reality. So the congregation that I was serving, we had been in conversation about a sabbatical, and they elected to give that to me anyway at the end of my time there. So I had a cushion at the end, but we lived off savings from May of 2014 till January of 2015, that first year, which was, that was hard. We didn't sell our house right away. We were paying rent here in Durham. There were some factors that just made that really really, really difficult. We fundraised. I mean, we wrote letters to every human being we knew, and asked for funds to support us. And it was during that time that funds started to come in, but not enough to sustain us at that point. There's some grants with 1001, but the first grant is $7,500, so we weren't both full-time. I was full-time, and my colleague Alan, who was the primary farmer at the beginning, was quarter time. But that $7,500 didn't last long. So part of what makes it so tricky is the sort of new church development in this way is the fundraising. But the other side of that is that when you jump and say, I'm going to build the plane on the way down, every resource that you come across is meaningful. Every conversation, every potential giver, every person who is willing to show up with work or wisdom is essential. There is nothing to fall back on other than, God, which is a lot. But in terms of how is God going to provide for us during this time, the sense of urgency that it brought to all of the work that we did was also necessary. I mean, that was a key ingredient to us getting this done. I had been saying, I'll add this dimension, I'd been saying for the first couple of years to anyone who would listen to Presbyterian Church especially, I was saying, you can't make people like us the poster children of innovation, but also the poster children of exposed risk at the same time. Like, we're doing this, and the Presbyterian Church needs people to do stuff like this. But I kept saying, like, we don't have, I thank goodness for Obamacare, but we don't have disability insurance. There's none of that. And then 2 years into Farm Church, I was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. So then that just really presented the dilemma in Technicolor, and some of the things that have changed in regards to people who start new worshiping communities having access to Board of Pensions benefits. We were part of that narrative that kind of made that change. But at times it was awful. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It was terrible. Although when I was diagnosed, one of the first thoughts I had was how extremely grateful I was that I was doing exactly what I was called to do. There is something that is so liberating about that. To say, oh my gosh, I have stage 4 cancer. Wow, there's nothing I feel like I need to hurry up and do. I'm doing it. And to feel like, it sort of makes me wonder about, and I don't mean to have delusions of grandeur here, but I don't know, when Moses didn't see the promised land, he might have been like, that's okay. Like, I'm here doing what I needed to do. There's that. I think that can be part of our story too. And so I often use the words terrifying and exhilarating together when I describe the out on a limbness of this experience. So, but a short answer, we asked everybody we could think of to give us money to start Farm Church. We fundraised and fundraised and fundraised. It's exhausting, but it was necessary. And it eventually, we're not financially sustainable now, but here we are. It's 2020 and we still exist, and we have funding for, I've since gone on disability, and Alan, my colleague, is in the lead, and we have funding through the end of the year, which is great. It's amazing. We still pinch ourselves about that.
Cool. One more question maybe, or maybe Chris, go ahead.
Ben, you mentioned membership in talking kind of the ethos of Farm Church. And I really like what you had to say. I think that it's the way that we have to do things into the future as churches, just because of I think everybody is institutionally suspicious. It's not just the church's institution, it's all institutions. Yeah. And I think membership is a model of the past. What my question is how did that work within the Presbyterian context, where membership holds so much gravitas, weight towards chartering, towards a church's reality per capita, so how did you work out those bureaucratic things with that ethos?
It hasn't all been worked out yet. One of the advantages to being one of the 1001 new worshiping communities is you have nonprofit status through the umbrella of the PCUSA, but if you want it, but you're technically not a congregation of your presbytery until you, with your presbytery, become an official PCUSA congregation. And we're in conversation with the presbytery about that. And the truth is, at this point, Farm Church has, we call it a council of stewards, but it operates like a session. That is not, Alan and I are not going to make that call, just the two of us. We are urging the council of stewards to make that move, but to do it in a way, when you have a congregation full of spiritually hungry but institutionally suspicious people who already were kind of out the door and are giving church one more shot, becoming a chartered congregation of the denomination is going to be a group decision. And we've had folks say, like, I'm not cool with that. But one of our appeals, one of the things we've communicated is, look, we exist in some ways because of the PCUSA and some of the support that they have given us. That alone is not a reason to charter, and that's not why the PCUSA should be giving money to new churches. I realize that, but to sort of say, like, there's value in being in a covenant relationship with brother and sister churches. There's value in that. And there's ways that we support congregations as well in terms of mission and opportunities for that. For our own bylaws, we've said, and this is going to sound kind of goofy maybe, because anticipating that one day that the presbytery will say, well, we need a membership from you, or your elders need to be members to be ordained into that role. Like, there's all of that. So we've said, okay, if you think you're a member of Farm Church, you're a member of Farm Church. If you show up and you consider yourself a member, then that's fine. You're a member. Because what we want to talk about is who is actively engaged and participating and giving to and receiving from the ministry of Farm Church. Those are our people. But if they force us to put a number down, we'll just say, really the number that we'll use will be a realistic reflection of who are our active participants now. We're happy to break down ages, but we're not going to create an institutional layer to satisfy a number cruncher somewhere if it doesn't make sense for our community. So for purposes of congregational voting, for example, when we bring on our first class, when we brought on our first class of stewards, we said, you can vote if you want to vote. There's obviously there could be problems with that down the road, but that's the way we're doing it now. We're and our people have all been good with that. So it's tricky, and I don't think there's one answer for everybody everywhere. Depending on your context or your presbytery. A lot of it is how leaders interpret those expectations and norms to the congregation, and then how we also broker those congregational decisions with the larger presbytery. And our presbytery gets it. I mean, they've said, yeah, we're not gonna. If that's the only thing, and it's not. But if there's like they're not going to make that a barrier to us being a PCUSA congregation. Does that answer your question?
Follow up with a follow-up question from John in that too, John Pavelka, who has joined us. But weren't you under the care of a session? So what were you under care of?
We were as a congregation, we were a 1001 new worshiping community of New Hope Presbytery here in North Carolina. We did not have one congregation that was our session that sponsored us. I realize that the template is different in different presbyteries, but we had direct oversight and accountability to the Church Development and Evangelism Committee of the Presbytery. And so there was a liaison who was part of our core team even before we started meeting. We did a lot of that kind of stuff to have representation, but yeah, we didn't have a session that we were touching base with.
All right, and let's go to Jace's question too, and then we'll move forward. Jace has asked, what does your funding go towards?
Primarily, so we don't pay for space. The land where we garden near Duke University is donated to us. We don't pay any rent for Sunday, which that still just boggles my mind. The folks at that nonprofit, which is a secular nonprofit, said at the beginning, you know, you'll get people in here who don't know about us, and that's good for us, and your mission furthers our values, and so we want to host you, and we pay for water that we use there. You know, we split the water bill. Staff is our main thing. We wrote a grant a year in with Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it was a $50,000 grant, and we billed it as a capacity building grant, so that when we wanted to pay for things like tools, soil amendments, if we needed to rent a tractor or those kinds of things, we could take it out of that. We crowdsourced, you know, like some projects. We said we need to build a shed on this one plot, and so we crowdsourced it, and people donated, gave us Lowe's gift cards, and then we went to Lowe's and we bought a shed. You know, you get creative about how you fund certain things that way. So we did a bit of that, but our main item, like a lot of churches, is staff, is paying pastors. And right now we have Alan is full-time, and then we also hire we have an accountant, part-time accounting firm that does a lot of our books for us. So those two things mainly.
Great. All right. Well, we will move forward with the rest of your presentation. Thank you. And then we'll have some more time for discussions and questions at the end. Should be good.
Yeah. I should also say seeds. We buy a lot of seeds and plant starts, although some of that we can take out of the capacity building grant. People are willing to donate things like seeds, though. There's stores around town that have given us a lot. People have sent us seeds. So that hasn't been too much of an issue. All right, so this is our quick outline for the rest of our time. And this, I'm pulling the camera back from Farm Church and thinking more broadly about risk-taking in the culture and faithful risk-taking in our congregations. 3 images: downward escalator, love, broken love, egg, and cows. Uh-oh. For some reason, there we go. So downward escalator, I'm assuming this is a downward escalator, and I'm using this as an image because I want us to think, again, pull the camera way back, and I want us to think in terms of trust in our culture, trust in institutions. This is one of my favorite gifts of all time. GIFs? Have you ever walked up a down escalator? You know, it's what I love about this video is like even though it's obviously edited, you just think she's gonna make it. There's a moment where she switches tactics and goes 2 steps at a time, and she's just like, nope, slips, and down she goes. The thing about climbing up a downward escalator is, and you know this if you've tried it, the nanosecond you stop, or stumble, down you go. That's the downward escalator video, which you will see again, just because I like it. And I use that to say, I want for our conversation, I want to suggest that the downward escalator symbolizes the downward sense of trust that our culture has in institutions. Not just thinking about church, but institutions in general. And you could just take a minute and imagine, if you could put them in the chat room or say them out loud if you want. You can unmute yourself and say it out loud. But like, what's an institution that we trust less now than we did, say, 20, 30 years ago? Can you name one? I wonder, let's see.
I said banks.
Banks, financial institutions.
Government.
What else? Stock market, government. I see. Okay, I'm looking at the chat room. So if you could type it in there, I'll see it. Financial institutions, government. I mean, good Lord, we trust that. And even with Trump, encouraging people to trust it, less. Yes, public education, schools, Renee and Stephanie coming in neck and neck. What else? What other institutions? Church, absolutely. We trust.
Yep.
Media.
PCUSA.
The PCUSA. Healthcare. Totes.
I was saying yes to Chris, like media, totes, and I typed toes.
Oh, yeah. Got it.
Sorry.
Toes. And we trust toes less than we used to. Let me add real quick, sports, professional sports, thinking about the Olympics, the FIFA scandal, the Houston Astros cheating in professional sports. You could even say, is there an institution that we trust the same or more than we did 20 or 30 years ago? I don't think there is. Thanks, Dave. Each other. Even there was The Economist put a thing out a couple of years ago talking about this, and they just said interpersonal trust within family systems. I mean, it's just an interesting question to sort of say, what does it mean to serve a church today when we not only trust institutions less, but we trust each other less than we did 10, 20, 30 years ago? The Board of Pensions, yeah. Okay, so the downward escalator, I want you to sort of imagine that the downward escalator is the eroding trust in our culture and institutions. And as pastors and as leaders in our congregation or as a committee working on new church development, part of our task feels often like it's to somehow counteract this cascade of trust, this eroding trust in institutions. And so we work and work and work and work, and we try, we do new things, we innovate, we show up in new ways, creative ways on Sunday, and we work hard. I mean, you can work, it's sort of the energy of walking up a downward escalator. And I just want to acknowledge this truth that the nanosecond we stop, we don't change that reality. If thinking about this sort of tidal wave of mistrust in institutions that has been part of our culture for so long and continues, I think we fool ourselves into thinking, yeah, but if we just, in this context, in this faith community, if we just work and work and work, we can, obviously we can do good things, and we need to be innovative, and we need to try, we need to risk. I'm only just making the point here that we will not undo this wider truth that is active right now in our culture. Some of you, we've all seen sort of charts like these that talk about the decline of participation in churches among, across the board. The the yellow line is mainline Protestant, just between the 70s and now. And just this represents more than, this is part of a larger trend in our culture. It also, represents some interesting tipping points that it's no longer given that children know who God or Jesus is, or what the Bible is, or sort of the general knowledge that might pique people's curiosity doesn't exist. The only line that is consistently growing on this chart is no religion at all, or as Renee would maybe say, the nuns and duns. That these are the folks that are growing. And so when the work that we're doing, trying to somehow counteract, not just like the history of our own congregation or missteps from the previous pastor or what happened to those families who left the church, but this wider conversation, this wider reality of declining trust in institutions. One of the problems we're having is burnout. And I wanted to suggest this is one of the main reasons why. If you need any more of an illustration of this, pretend you're on a downward escalator. And somewhere on that escalator, there's a door that has been shut. And then someone has come along, and I know this doesn't make sense mechanically for the escalator, but someone has backfilled it with cement from the top. Like, the sooner we get off this escalator, the better. Like, it is a no-win situation for us. I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to build trust in our communities. Obviously we should, but we will not, in the work we're doing and in our individual congregations, we will not turn this tide around. And I think that's an important reality to just name, okay? And I think it's helpful for our congregations, and which leads me to the second point. Let me start here. I want you to imagine, so I have 3 girls, 16, 13, and 11. So imagine right now that you've got a teenage daughter who gets her heart broke, dumped, and is just so upset about it. I want you to imagine all of the things that if you said them to your daughter, you would be a horrible, terrible parent. Not, I mean, like bad, like, you want to say like, well, everybody's trying their best. And no, if you say these things, you are a terrible parent. And these would be the kind of things where your daughter gets dumped and you say to her something like, well, honey, if you were prettier, he might not have dumped you. Or honey, if you just tried harder. Well, maybe you shouldn't make him angry or frustrated. Then he might not dump you. Maybe if you worked harder. But obviously, if you say those things to your teenage daughter when she gets her heart broke, I'm just sorry, you're that's a horrible, awful, awful thing to say. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because we say this kind of crap to ourselves as churches all the time. All the time. Maybe not explicitly, but these are conversations that take place in fellowship halls and committee meetings and parking lots, and sometimes in worship services where we just say, oh, if only we were younger. If only, I've been in conversations with churches where I've sort of laid some of this stuff out and about, some of us have heard that conversation about living into adaptive challenges instead of making technical changes, that we can make technical changes. I mean, yeah, you can put a guitar in your worship service, you can serve Starbucks coffee. Those are technical changes, and maybe that they're good ideas and maybe they're not. Get a screen, I don't know. Those are technical changes. Adaptive challenges engage a wider or a more focused set of questions. Who are we? Why are we here? Why has God called us into being at this very time? We need a compelling answer to that, not so that we can communicate it to the world, but so that we can convince ourselves. That's the first step. So I'll be having this kind of, conversation with a congregation, and then I'll say, let's break and talk about some adaptive challenges. And invariably somebody, comes back, and God bless them. We are all doing the best we can, but they'll say, it'd be helpful, I think, if we planted geraniums out by the sign, by the road. It's kind of ugly. And I go, oh God, yeah, okay, yeah, plant geraniums. That is a technical change. It's fine. It's probably good. It's active. I like geraniums. Do it. But that is a version of, if only we were prettier. If only our building wasn't clunky. If only we had a young pastor. If only we could get a young youth leader. If only we weren't so aging. If only we could balance the budget. Like there is a negative, toxic, terrible self-talk that happens in our churches. And it's like saying to your 16-year-old daughter who just got her heart broke, well, honey, if you just were prettier, or maybe if you just tried to make him happy, I think, I know why people say those things. It's in some ways, it's a reaction to this downward trust in institutions, which is horrifying, because we look at the numbers and we think about where we were 30 years ago or 50 years ago. All of us who are pastors on this Zoom call have heard some version of when things were fine, and it was a long time ago, and the Sunday school classrooms were full, and blah blah. We've all heard that, and that has a certain kind of toxic power in our communities, and a lot of times we say those things in response to this downward spiral of trust in institutions, of which the church is certainly a part, and it's crushing us. And so, in part, I like breaking this presentation down into these images, because it helps us say to people, like, no, we're not going to do that. God has called us into existence here and now, and there is joy in exploring the reason for that. And the risks that might create for us, the faithful risks. The third image is of cows. This is a great, there's versions of this online I've found over the years, but I've always kind of, it's a made for farm church analogy for sure with cows, but it comes from a mathematical concept called set theory. And the idea is that in set theory, there are two kinds of sets. There are bounded sets and centered sets. A bounded set is like equations with whole numbers, or it applies to cultures and groups of people too. So those of you who are over the age of 41 and above, you are part of a bounded set of society, because you're over, or a bounded set could be people between the age of 30 and 35, or bounded set could be people who have not gotten a speeding ticket in the last 6 months. It's sort of like, this is a category of people, and there's a clear boundary around it. When we talk about membership in our churches, a lot of times the word membership brings up a bounded set mentality. You are either, we communicate a bounded set on the pew inserts in the rows in our churches that say, define which bounded set you're a part of. Are you a member, a non-member, a visitor? That's a bounded setness. And at times bounded sets in life and in mathematics can be useful. Hold that thought. If you want, you can doodle this down, but I'm just going to put it up here. Imagine a graph. And on one side of the graph, you have the word clubhouse, and on the other side, you have the word outpost. And if you could, for a moment, imagine, what are some characteristics of a clubhouse, and what are some characteristics of an outpost? Just even thinking about, we're just doing some free association with those two words. A clubhouse, when we think about a clubhouse, either it could be a clubhouse that you belonged to when you were a kid, maybe it was one you built in your backyard with your friends, or maybe even thinking now about clubhouses, clubs, country club house, We have a certain list of words that we might associate with a clubhouse. And you can write those in your chat if you want. But then, well, maybe let's do that. I'm going to look at the chat board real quick while we're doing this. Actually, I can't access it. Renee, could you read a couple? Oh, here we go. There we go. Insider language, closed, exclusive. Clubhouses implies set membership, members in a clubhouse. And why do we go to clubhouses? We like clubhouse, and clubhouses are great. Like, you belong there, your people are there, it's familiar, sometimes you help build it. Certainly belonging, there's a sense of ownership and belonging to one another and belonging to that place and that place belonging to you. Clubhouses are fun. And we tend to go to clubhouses because we like it there. We like we put things there that we like. The furniture, anybody we hire, we like them. That's why we have them there. If you think about an outpost, though, I like what some of you are writing. It implies transient people. It tends to be remote. What else about outposts? You can purchase items that are needed for travelers at an outpost. Yeah. This idea that Renee had no boys in her childhood clubhouse. That was probably good. Outpost isn't about you, it's about everyone, yeah. Frontier, on the border, cutting edge. An outpost, you think, a lot of times outposts don't exist alone. They are an extension of something else that's feeding it, that's giving it supplies. Outposts, there's a real reason to be there. There's a mission around an outpost that's clear, and if that mission isn't being met, there's a problem. The outpost exists to serve or to keep safe. It's a helpful tool, by the way, just taking this out of context of the wider presentation, in a church group to do this very thing and ask, are we a clubhouse or are we an outpost? The truth is, a lot of times we're both. It's a way to help us be thoughtful about and maybe critical of our identity and how we behave and how we're perceived. A lot of times a clubhouse has a bounded set mentality and membership. That to be part, this is an example of bounded setness. That people who are participants in a clubhouse, whether it's official or unofficial, there is a spoken or unspoken sense of bounded setness, of either belonging or not belonging. And one of the things I would say is churches, it's something to deal with, because sometimes I'm curious about how even our language of welcome also reinforces the bounded set of our worship space and our community. Whereas an outpost, we think of the second kind of set in mathematics or in cattle ranching, and it's called a centered set. So a centered set, I'm going to close the chat now, but I like what Chris just wrote about clubhouse is coming in, outpost is going out. Good. In a centered set, in both mathematics and concepts, there's what identifies the group is not a boundary reality, but a centered reality. So a good example of a centered set would be people who are trying to lose weight. Like, you could be trying to lose 5 pounds or 100 pounds. You could be losing weight to get ready for a surgery or to get in shape or to lower your cholesterol. Like, there's a lot of ways to be in relationship with that goal, and there isn't a clear, like, you're either in or you're out. You might be in one day and out the next, but you have this as a goal. You could be 100 miles away from that goal, or you could be right up next to it. that is called, that's a centered set, where there is a center goal and people can be in all kinds of different orientations towards that goal. A centered set is a mission-oriented context. We are here because of our passion about this particular mission or outcome. Cows. There are some ranches in the world that are so large, it's almost impossible, and mainly in like the outback of Australia, where there's just, people have ranches that are thousands and thousands and thousands of acres, and it's actually impossible. If you can imagine like a ranch that just stretches on from horizon to horizon, it's not impossible, but it's tricky to have, if you have cattle on that land, to think in terms of a bounded set, of a fence that runs the perimeter of that land to keep those cattle together. Trying to raise cattle with a bounded set in some contexts is almost impossible, because things happen to fences. Even, I mean, imagine a ranch with like, 100 miles of fence. Well, then it's someone's full-time job to constantly maintain that fence. Somebody is always propping it up because things are always happening. The fence is always breaking somewhere. Somewhere the fence is rotting. There's a fence post that's rotted at the bottom, right? So how do they keep cattle together on these vast ranches? Well, they change their thinking from bounded set to centered set. And they do away with fences entirely. And instead of building a fence and maintaining a fence, they dig a well. So these cows by this well need that water to survive. And the truth is, they will only walk so far away from that water before they know they have to turn around and go back. And you keep your cattle together with a centered set mentality, with a well at the beginning and in the middle. I think this has crazy exciting implications for how we think about church. And it's beyond the question of member or non-member. Is someone in or out as a member? It really goes beyond that to this question of think about the cattle rancher who's maintaining 100 miles of fence. And that's kind of like not just the pastor, but many of us in our churches who are working ourselves to death. It feels like running up a down escalator, trying to maintain the institutional systems of our congregations. When we think about our church and all of the things that keep it running, sometimes it feels like keeping plates spinning in the air. And so we busy ourselves necessarily with the institutional maintenance of our congregations, of constantly keeping things in motion. And it's about everything. We'll get into that in a little bit. The question is, what does it look like when we become a centered set congregation? Another way of asking that is, when we answer the question, who are we, why are we here? What does it mean to be in relationship with the sacred source of the universe in and through Jesus Christ in this particular place? It's not fence maintenance. It's not institutional maintenance. It's not managing the institutional weight that, by the way, our culture has stopped trusting long ago anyway. It's about digging a well. If this were a children's sermon, this is when we say, well, what is the well? And you all say, Jesus, right? The well, what is the well? What is the life giver? And what is our way of understanding that life? But the question is, what does digging a well look like in your context? So back to faithful risk-taking. The question about faithful risk-taking is, what can we do if you ask yourself, what can we do that's innovative and sleek and, hey, that's never been done before? Like, those may be good questions to ask. They can also fall in the category of the same technical changes that, you could also put cup holders in the pews. Like, okay, the question is, what does it mean for us in this context to dig a well and have that be our sole mission? And to create a centered set that isn't about, that's about people being fed or getting access to living water here. This is the last thing I have, and then we can open up for questions. The most useful tool that I ran across as we were planning Farm Church, and it didn't come till much later, but it gave clarity to a lot of the things that we were doing, is this thing called a lean canvas. If you're an entrepreneur in the business world or tech sectors, you've seen these before. There's a million versions of them online. If you Google lean canvas and do an image search, the hundreds, thousands, because this is sort of a map for someone who wants to start a business. I always thought that people who started a business, that the first thing you did was that you figured out what you wanted to sell or what service you wanted to provide. On a lean canvas, the first question that you ask is, what is the problem that we want to solve? Forget everything else on this chart. What is the problem that we want to tackle? And really, that is the most important thing to ask first. And you might even couch it in terms of 3 problems. I was at an entrepreneurial sort of training. I was the only pastor there. A bunch of people who were in tech startups and other kind of businesses getting things off the ground were there. And this person was presenting this idea. And she said, the first question we're going to ask is, what problem are we here to solve? And it was stunning to me. When I thought, do churches ask that question? And the truth is we do, but we could think about it right now. If we walk into any church, just average church in our culture, maybe it's the church that you serve, and we say to people in that church, what are the 2 or 3 problems right now in this congregation that are taking up 80 to 95% of our time and energy? What are those problems? We know what people say. You're thinking about that list right now. I'm not saying what are the pet projects of this congregation or what is the mission committee doing right now. I'm just saying, if we could list the 2 or 3 problems that are eating up 90% of our time and our energy, our thought life, our meetings, what are those problems? And we know what they are. Deferred maintenance on the building, budget, stewardship, declining membership. These are just things we would name, right? Stewardship, we would say, some people have said volunteer burnout. The problems that, I've served, a couple of churches I've served, I felt like we spent an inordinate amount of time talking about our parking lot and who was parking there and who wasn't parking there. It wasn't our biggest problem, but it was like, what we're really talking about is membership, money, building, volunteers, staff, okay? Those tend to be the problems that we and the people who are participating in our churches name when they think about the biggest problems that we have. And here's the thing, and this is thinking towards faithful risk-taking. This is maybe the most important thing that I'm going to say today. So hear this. No one cares. No one in the entire world cares that your church has those problems. You care, obviously, and your friends in the presbytery care. The presbytery cares, but like no one outside your church cares that you have problems in your church that have to do with your own institutional maintenance, your bounded set maintenance. And ironically, we want people to join our churches because to us, they represent solutions to the problems that, by the way, they already don't care about. That's the old, if we had 3 more families join this year and they each gave $5,000, we'd close that budget gap. Yeah. Imagine going to your bank and asking your bank what their biggest problem is, and they look at you and say, the refrigerator in the break room is leaking, and we think we have it fixed, and then we don't have it fixed. And like, you'd be like, I don't care. I'm your biggest problem. I'm your customer. My money, like, I just want to name that that's the reality that's happening in a lot of our churches. We have heavily invested in problems that no one cares about. And the sooner we accept that, I'm not saying that, well, what I'm saying is there's liberation in recognizing that no one cares about our institutional maintenance problems. In this context right now, let me put it in focus for you. All of a sudden, with social distancing and stay-at-home orders, we have realized for a while here, in many cases, not all cases, but suddenly our buildings are irrelevant. Just like no one's going to our buildings. Okay? Well, think about this. To the vast majority of our culture, your building was already irrelevant. Already. They already didn't care that your roof was leaking. And it is a recipe for disaster when we articulate and spend a majority of our time and energy and money addressing problems that no one outside of our system cares about. If we think about individual church decline, it is not about song style. It's not about the age of the leader. It's not about age of the congregation. It's not about a lot of things that we think it's about. It's that we have invested heavily in problems that no one cares about. If we think about faithful risk-taking, it begins with a question: what problem do people care about? And what does it look like to orient around that problem and to say, can we spend 80% of our time and energy addressing that problem? I'm not saying that we just drop the institutional issues that we have. A cattle rancher who has a centered set ranch still has cattle. It's a different orientation of thinking. And it's an exciting question to ask. Can we take risks that shift our weight from managing institutional weight to addressing problems that folks in our community really care about? Do we even know what those are? And I think that the risks that push us toward the latter, there is a way in which some of the institutional problems take care of themselves. People don't want to join a church so that they can become an answer to the institutional problems that we're having. But people are asking the same question, especially now: who am I and why am I here? You know, as things slowly sort of sort themselves back to normal, the question is, how is the church going to show up and answer those questions? And I think the risks that we take, and I think a lot in terms of micro risks, small risks, the prayer wall, the away games, the things that we do, but also the big risks that we take, I think need to be in line with that kind of thinking. It's not innovation for innovation's sake or creativity for creativity's sake. It's asking, what does it look like for us to dig our well here? Not for the sake of our institution, but for the sake of the problems that people are having, to be the gospel in the midst of those issues and problems in people's lives. All right, I'll stop there and open it up for questions. Oh, I see a comment that says blasphemy. That's probably good.
Well, and thank you. This is like so extremely valuable. And
yeah, good. I've run over. I hope you all were eating lunch. Sorry about that.
No, that's good. One thing I need to say too is I personally did not tell anyone on this call. I'm so sorry that I have to go right at 1 because I run a support group over the phone and I need to go do that. So if I duck out, feel free to, whatever you all want to do. And of course we'll finish at 1, but if, you all need to go over 10 minutes or something, feel free. All right, who has questions? Actually, Chris, if you wouldn't mind, just sort of, since I'm going to duck out in 15 minutes, if you want to.
Yeah, and I need to leave soon after 1 too. I have another Zoom at 1:15.
Okay, well then we'll make sure we finish.
Yeah, right, yeah. So.
Yourself. Yeah, okay, great.
Anyone want to ask a question? Either you can raise your hand or actually in your video or on your thing there. Make a comment in the chat, whatever.
Well, that's that. Then I guess we're done. That's all pretty easy, digestible. Now go and do likewise.
Yeah, what? Say that again, Renee.
I just said our comments too, things that maybe you connected with. But I see Jay said, you mentioned that people don't all come to Sunday church.
Right.
Did you have more to say about that, Jace? Is this a church in the area?
Yeah, Jace, fill your turn your mic on and go ahead and talk.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not really good at typing fast. So what I was wondering is, you talk about people not coming to the church. Now, do you have, what type of people do you have that are at this farm church? I mean, are they people like what Renee deals with, the nuns and duns? Are they people that are churched, but they want to do this extra stuff? You know, what does it look like?
Yeah, good question. It's a mix. Not very many Presbyterians, not very many folks who readily identify themselves with any one denomination. Some folks have sort of bounced in and out of churches over time. Very few people who like move to town, gonna find a church, let's go, you know. A lot of people who have articulated this, it's farm church or nothing. Like, I was done, but this looked really cool, so I tried it out. Or so there's a lot of folks like that who kind of had one foot way out the door of the institutional church already. Various backgrounds, various, you know, dabblers in church before. Some people who've have not been to church in a decade, you know, but because of their interest in food security and sort of thinking about farming and spirituality, they thought, well, this could be cool. And we say to people too, like, if you don't like farming and if food security is not a big issue for you, you're probably not going to like farm church. A lot of churches find themselves a mile wide and an inch deep with mission commitments and things that sort of identify who they are and why they exist. And we're sort of asking, what does it look like to be an inch wide and a mile deep? That is how we dig the well here. We're a food security church. We're not gonna get kind of do a bunch of other things. Everything that we do, like, it's all guns on all decks. Sorry to use a military sort of analogy here, but all guns on all decks shoot at this problem all the time, every time we gather, every time we work together. This is why we exist. This is how we pronounce the gospel here. And it's interesting to think, and not every church can do this, but I think we can do it in interesting ways. Like, for example, we know that the single most important factor about whether or not a child is going to graduate from high school is whether or not they can read by the 3rd grade. Like, that's data that's been proven. So what if a church just said, okay, we are going to be the church that within in a 5-mile radius of this building, we want to make sure that all children can read by the 3rd grade, and we're going to go nuts. That's why we exist. And if it's not about that, we're not going to do it. I mean, what does it look like to invert not a mile wide and an inch, and not a mile wide and an inch deep, but an inch wide and a mile deep, going all the way through and attacking this issue and saying, this is the problem that we are here to solve. And we're not going to quit. We're just going to keep showing up. We're going to be so annoying in the way we show up for this. Like, we're just going to just drive and drive and drive and drive. I think the wider culture is waiting for people to, some of the people there that come are like, I think just sort of like looking at a church that does that and saying, yeah, sort of like watching a Hail Mary in a football game. Like, I'll watch that. I might not even care about football, but that, like, watching the church throw a Hail Mary and just say, we're putting it all on this moment and we're going for it. I think that is the kind of well digging that we're talking about. And so some people who come are just are refreshed with that idea. So it's it's really like a lot of churches. It's a mix of people. But maybe you were asking us too. We meet every Sunday. We have Sunday worship. We have gardening throughout the week. One cool thing is that gardening still takes place now. People can come and garden together outside and stay apart from each other, and we can still get some work done. So that's happening even now. We're able to get together in that way. Other questions?
Isaac had a.
Oh yeah.
Isaac had a question. I also wanted to say one thing that's been kind of weird and cool about this time is, as much as we're separated, I've been Zooming into Farm Church, and I can do that, in Michigan. And so if you want to come sometime, let me know. We'll make it happen. Okay, so Isaac was asking, what were your 3 problems with Farm Church?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was saying that lean canvas was not something I was aware of when we started. Neither one of us were. It sort of later showed up and enlightened something. And the truth was, it was one problem, and the problem was food insecurity. What does it look like to create a church around that problem? We've also sort of said over time that we were sort of addressing some other problems too. One of those problems was what often feels like a disconnect in our culture from the land and from food, that a lot of the food that we eat, we don't eat it until it's been processed and it's in a box, and sort of that's a problem that we were addressing related to food insecurity. Another problem is the fact that even though that it's related to food insecurity, but a lot of people don't know what to do with kale. So we take 40 pounds of kale to the food pantry. If people don't know what to do with kale or a butternut squash, or they don't have the tools, so then we've started to do more. And as we envision sort of next steps for us we're having some conversation about how do we upsize some of the stuff we're doing. Part of the response is how do we not just become a provider of food, but an educator about food. Even if you think about a church that meets on a farm and leverages the resources of the farm, that's a broad scope. And we've started articulating about things in terms of a triple bottom line, that everything we do is about social justice, sharing food with people, but it's also about environmental stewardship, which is another sort of side problem that we end up addressing, but also economic development. Those things are all in concert together, but we envision a larger piece of land at some point where we've got a commercial kitchen and we're dealing with entrepreneurs who are getting businesses off the ground, and we can help enable that, especially in struggling neighborhoods in our city where folks are trying to get the pieces together to get a food truck off the ground, for example. Farm Church could be a part of that. And so, it's at the beginning, we didn't say, what problem are we going to address? We just sort of lived into that reality. And then when the language came along, we were like, oh, that really articulates something for us. I will say this, at Farm Church, we practice saying that elevator speech almost every Sunday. And we've had moments where we've invited people during worship, during the passing of the peace, especially on a Sunday where there might not be visitors, where we invite people to go around and practice sharing the elevator speech with each other. Our children know it. Not to slight a lot of our mission statements in our churches, but no one knows what they are, and they're all the same. And like, we're a community of Jesus Christ that gathers to worship, and we welcome all. And it's like, oh God, I'm tired. Yes, we all say that. Who are you? Why are you here? In what way are you digging the well? I think that we need to incorporate the problems that we're solving right in the mission statement. And it doesn't matter it matters both for the people that we're inviting, but it also matters for us, so that we're constantly rehearsing, who are we, why are we here? I think it's really important.
Cool, thank you. First of all, Isaac said there is a church in Detroit working with Detroit schools on that exact.
Oh, yay, good.
Which is so cool, love that. One question I have, or just when you and Alan arrived in Durham and we're having those first conversations people. One thing I was so touched by, and I have thought about it personally so many times and so many things I've been doing work-wise and otherwise, is this kind of approach of following the leads, following every thread of the conversation. And I was wondering if you could tell people about that approach, which was entertaining and exhausting. I think amazing in the ways that God provided and community provided, and just wanted to talk about that.
And do it in 5 minutes, Ben.
Got it. We had 2 rules when we landed. We decided 2 of our rules would be, we are going to make every call and we are going to follow every lead as far as it goes. So that means if someone said, well, you might want to talk to the people over at the ag council or farmer food share, we made every call. We always reached out and we asked questions. Sometimes it was just to meet somebody or learn from somebody, but who do you know that would be interested in this? We didn't have land in the beginning. We didn't have a place to put seeds in the ground. We did not have a place to meet. We didn't have people. So we just said, we're going to make every call and we're going to follow every lead. So we have in our history, these rabbit trails that we followed of conversations, and someone said, well, there's somebody, like somebody said, oh, there's a woman out in Chatham County, kind of west, or Orange County, west of us, who started a church. You should go talk to her. So here's somebody who started a church in the area. So we talked to her, and she said, oh, there's somebody from this congregation who used to be involved. She's not really involved anymore, but she's on a farm down by Chapel Hill. You should go talk to her. So we go talk to her. Those have led to, I don't have time to say everything that those conversations brought out. I will say that I think in the traditional parish context, there is so much to do. A lot of it is institutional maintenance stuff, just kind of keeping everything going. There's a lot to do. We lose sight of that. We sort of think that the next big thing is always the next worship service or the next big milestone on the sessions calendar. It's not. The next big thing is your next conversation. And you don't know what that's going to birth. And so we need to show up fully for that and listen. And so that was something that at some point we had to stop. I mean, because the network got too vast, but that was a big part of what we did in the beginning. And this is a way, and you all know this in your work, I'm sure. Church plants have so much to teach the wider church, because we're living in this reality of, sort of jumping and figuring out how to build the plane on the way down, or in some cases. And so there are lessons we have to teach the wider church. And one of the things I'm interested in is sharing all this stuff, but also setting up opportunities for the wider church to learn about the letters that we're writing from this particular front. I don't want to say the front, but this particular movement. Lots of little lessons.
Thank you. Love it. Okay. Well, I think this has been really great. Just very
it's good to be with you guys.
Yeah. And we're just like super honored. And I don't know if you saw in the chat, but several people were like, when will this recording be available? I'm so ready to share this with the church.
Yeah,
so
please do. Yeah.
We're so grateful. I was wondering if someone might pray for us as we are leaving. Yeah. And if I duck out by the end of the prayer, I care about prayer, but I also got to call my community. So yeah. Kara, could you do that?
God, as we go from this place, walk with us, be with us in all the ways that we need you. May you open us up to new possibilities, to the ways that we can see you in our communities. May we dig those wells deep, and may they lead to life in ways that we could never imagine otherwise. Be with us this day and every day, oh God. Amen.
Amen.
Hey, blessings. Thank you for that. And hopefully we can meet in person someday. I was up in Iowa believe it or not, the Wednesday when the news all went crazy, I was on a plane for Sioux Falls, South Dakota, because I was doing a Presbytery event up in north central Iowa, which I sort of thought, what am I doing in Iowa? But they were, in Sioux Falls in northern Iowa, they that was one of the last areas to really lock down and do stay-at-home orders. And so a bunch of guys came to this, it was a men's retreat at this remote camp, and a bunch of guys came up there and didn't shake hands for a weekend. But I would love to come up to Michigan and spend more time with you all. So hope that happens sometime, or you're always welcome at Farm Church down in Durham.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, you're welcome.
This has been awesome. I know for me, it inspired my imagination and gave me a lot of hope. And so I just so appreciate you taking the time to spend with us. And I think everybody else, if you guys want to push the applause thing, so Ben sees your.
I didn't know that existed. That's
cool. Yeah, there you go. Thank you so much, Ben. We appreciate
you guys. Peace.
Yeah, we'll keep in touch. Thanks, Ben.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody else, for meeting. I'm going to download this and get it uploaded and send a link to the whole email list ASAP. So you should have that hopefully within the next hour. Please share it. It's going to be an unlisted YouTube thing because I don't want it, just out there in the public. But feel free to share the link however you want and with any communities that you want. I think Ben's okay with that. We're okay with that. So, all right. Have a good afternoon, you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.